down. A lot of people say that. You
Right.
don't have, I mean, I love, and a lot of yoga teachers, when you first start class, they say, if you can breathe, you can practice yoga. If you do nothing else today but breathe, that is yoga. So when you're doing a lot of these poses, you're connecting your breath with movement, but you're working the body in a way that allows you to still the mind. You know, when you do balance poses, your mind is clear.
But if you're doing a shavasana,
If you're doing shavasana, if you're in meditate, so say you don't like meditation, you have a hard time sitting still and you can't focus on your breath, do movement first. Maybe you try a yoga class or do some jumping jacks.
So that's kind of what we try to teach. You want to get the movement going.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And then you start.
You move the body, you still the mind.
Move the body, still the mind. Hey gang, welcome back to another Rest, Eat, Move podcast. And today I have the pleasure to talk to my daughter, Kristen.
Yahoo!
And so we used to do podcasts together quite a few years ago. And we haven't done as many as I'd like to, but I want her to have become a regular guest. And I'm going to I don't really want to do the background on my daughter, but she's the oldest of the twins, Matt and Kristen. And you're a minute older than Matt, right? So you kind of boss him around.
I try to. No, he's the boss of the group.
So again, Kristen is a registered dietitian for us. She does speaking, co-author of the Target to Table cookbook, and also a yoga instructor. And today what we want to talk about, again, this is her space. She's really good at this. She lives it. She breathes it, is about mindfulness. And really, what does that mean? Last week, we talked about mental health. If you haven't listened to that podcast last week, we talked a lot about, what's going on in the world with anxiety and depression and, overall mental health. And I think this kind of dovetails really nicely into the conversation we're going to have about mindfulness. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute. Kind of catch the listeners up about what you are currently doing, family. We were watching the kids Saturday night, and they were so funny. But anyway, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, it's a busy time right now. I like to say I'm a dietitian turned private chef, so I'm just really in the food space right now. And I do a lot of kind of corporate food events for just some local people in the area. I do breakfast, lunch events, meal service for some high-profile clients, and then right now I'm just seeking more of a full-time private chef position with one family. So lots of cooking, whether it's packaged to go or just making, a meal and experience. I have a lot of people I cook for right now, including you sometimes. So
in the smoothie cleanses, you've done that a few times, and that's always very successful. People are very interested in that, doing like a smoothie cleanse. So
that's nice because it's very focused. So for 3 days, people get 4 smoothies a day plus 1 juice. So they know what they're getting themselves into, and it's so short, and they feel good, and they just kind of have some motivation that they may need to kind of jumpstart their health goals. But yeah, otherwise life is busy. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I'm going to Bahamas this weekend for my husband's birthday, and it's fun times.
Yeah, and your 2 boys are they're so much fun.
They're fun, yeah.
But obviously at the same time, you guys are very busy. You and Sean are both very busy. So, and so really what kind of leads into, as a busy mom, working, family, how do you try to balance all that? And so I think this is a conversation, where Sean was talking a little bit about some of the interest that's out there about yoga. And I think this kind of fits into the conversation today. But if I ask you, what is your definition of mindfulness? Explain that to the listeners?
Yeah, and I think, I actually early on was very confused with what mindfulness was. What does it mean? And most people will say it's present moment awareness. So you're just paying attention to the present moment. The way I like to explain it, it's energy in the moment. So are you showing up in the moment engaged? Or are you thinking about the past? Are you thinking about the future? And when you were talking about mental health, stress and depression, they live in the past or they live in the future. And I think sometimes we can be free of some of these worries if we just focus on the moment and we only focus on the things that we can control. And also, the present moment is all we have. That's the only moment we can get things done. And I think, as a busy mom, I can always get stressed with thinking about all the things I have to do. But when I start doing those things and I'm in the moment and I'm checking, off the lists of the things I have to do, they always get done. And I think it is about time management, but if you don't have energy in your time, then it's kind of wasted time, I think. So it just kind of depends on what you're focusing on.
So share that one more time. Your definition of mindfulness.
It's energy in the present moment. So how are you showing up? Do you have energy? Because your moment is going to be a wasted moment if you don't feel good. And if you don't have focus, and if you're not, if you're lacking energy because you're not taking care of yourself. And I think as a mom, I've reprioritized what it means for self-care, because self-care isn't selfish, and I know that I won't have energy in the moment if I'm not practicing self-care. So, even though mindfulness is present moment awareness, and you can practice mindfulness with meditation because that allows you to be present, anything that you do, any breath work you do is in the present moment because you don't breathe in the past or the future. So a lot of times mindfulness practices are meditation. You can do breathing work before you fall asleep. You could do technology breaks, sleep trainings, just different practices, walking in nature, anything that allows you to be present. But I always kind of bring it back to, obviously, this is kind of what we do and what we believe in, but it all comes back to health too, because you can practice mindfulness, but if you're not being mindful of how you're resting, eating, and moving, to have energy in that present moment is going to be very hard.
I like what you said. You're talking about energy. And if you're always focusing on the past or the future, to me, you're spending a lot of energy on
Exactly
something that's really out of your hands.
Right.
Right. So again,
or may not even exist.
In most cases, it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes when I work with clients, or including myself,
Yep.
if you get so out here or out there, I'm spending a lot of wasted energy, or I'm wasting energy to think about things that
Right.
I'm not in the present moment.
Yeah, and when I'm in the present moment, I mean, that's where you have that kind of like flow where you're in the moment and you're getting stuff done. When you start thinking about, and Mom is so great with planning events, but sometimes I already know what I'm doing in my head. And if someone says, okay, well, how do you want this event set up? Or, how do you want me to set the table? Or it throws off my energy
flow.
in the moment,
Flow.
So a lot of times, and right now, like in the food space, I work alone a lot, and I'm very productive at that because I'm not having these distractions. I'm not having to explain to someone, I'm putting, this water on the stove right now because I'm going to start with boiling my pasta. Then I'm going to make my sauce. I already know what I'm doing. So to have to explain it, I think we just have to tackle the task at hand in that moment. And I think we get so bogged down with sometimes a lot of the details or what we need to do. Tomorrow I'm serving breakfast for 45 people. There's a lot to be done. I'm making sourdough bread, so that has to rise the night before. I also have a couple new clients right now that I'm making dinner for Monday through Friday this week. And then I have some of my other clients who need breakfast, lunch, and snack every day. So that's a lot of different moving parts.
Yeah, and you can't forget to pick up the kids. And
well, yeah, and then I have to feed my kids. And so I could get bogged down with all the little things I have to do, but talking about it and getting stressed about it does nothing. In fact, it just makes it worse. Because I know it will all get done.
But we talked about this last week, but it's such a skill.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can really, what's right in front of me, Matt talked about this, being in your shoes, where you're at, right then. It's such a hard thing to do, but it's such an amazing skill if you can start learning how to do that, like catching yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I thinking way out here?
Right.
We talked about this in our huddle today, that you can't control the outcome.
No.
Only I can do is control the process. Like you're saying, hey, tomorrow I'm speaking at an event tomorrow for 140 people. I know what I got to do. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I try to do more than anything is what you said at the very beginning, is protect my energy
right
as I go into that event. If I don't have good
Yes.
energy going to that event, it doesn't matter how much I'm prepping, whatever. But if I'm really prepared from an energy standpoint, then I'm gonna
You're going to rock it
I'm
in
gonna
the
rock
time
it.
that you have. And
Correct.
all of our time is limited. And I think, and I can tell sometimes if I get moving too fast, I forget something or I make a mistake. And then I say, okay, did you exercise today? Did you take any deep breaths? Did you have time for yourself where you could just, get your thoughts together? Because we get moving so fast. Like my kids wake me up sometimes at 5:30 in the morning and then I just hit the ground running. And sometimes all I want to do is just sit down and have a cup of coffee. But I know I first need to do maybe 10 minutes, I jump on the Peloton, or 15 minutes, I do a yoga routine to myself.
Sure.
Then I know my energy is going to be more powerful in my day. So, I think we have to understand that self-care is not selfish, and we need to take that time for
So
ourselves.
let's dive into this self-care thing for a minute. I really like what you just said about, I'm really using the word pace a lot more. In my book, I wrote a lot about space, but I find more and more people that I've worked with recently, their pace of their life, I'll ask them, is your pace on a 1 to 10 scale, is your pace a 3? Is it a 6? Is it a 10? What is your pace?
Interesting.
And if your pace and your space don't line up, which they never do, then we're going to have a problem.
Right.
And so I had a couple in here the other day, and his pace was a 4 and her pace was a 10. So, but why was her pace a 10 when his was a 4? Maybe he needs to move up a little bit. She moves it a little bit down. But it really hit him like the thing I learned the most in our session today, because I always go back and say, hey, what resonated with you today? And they both said pace. And then they say, okay, so if my pace is X and I don't have enough space for self-care, I'm probably going to move in a bad direction here.
Right.
So talk about self-care in your opinion. As a busy mom, professional, how do you prioritize, or what's really important to you from a self-care standpoint?
I mean, it's changed just because, everyone's short on time, but as a mom, I feel like my time is short.
Yeah, your space is limited from what it used to be.
So,
and your pace is still really high.
And and there's some day, like in the food world, it's hard because, I have this event on tomorrow. Well, I couldn't prep for it last week. I could do some things, but, it's timely. So it's just, there's some days where my pace is probably really slow, but I do need that to find more balance. Some days it's crazy and it's insane, but I also like that too because it drives me a little bit.
Because so that polarity management.
Yeah.
Is recognizing that certain days are going to be crazy.
Right.
But then I also have to plug in days that are a little bit more.
And those days, maybe I can practice a little bit more self-care. And if those days are slower, maybe I'm going to run or do something more high intensity. Like tomorrow, I'm probably going to wake up by 5 to make 2 loaves of bread, and it'll be a crazy day. And then maybe midday, I won't have the energy to run or lift, but maybe I can practice some yoga that slows me down a little bit. So that's where I look at my movements according to my day and what I need. Because, growing up, we grew up in a gym, and I felt like, and then I ran track, and I was always on the high intensity end of movement, which is fine. I was young, but now I almost want slow. I want like yin yoga. I want restorative. So I think you need to tap into that stuff a little bit more. And when I used to work out for an hour, now it's maybe 10, 15 minutes. And yes, I would like more, time for myself,
sure.
But I'm in a stage where I can't. And I think sometimes you have to let go of like that control and the perfection and just find more balance, even if it is just 5-10 minutes of movement. So I think to make it easy and to make it work with my lifestyle, I have to have these habits and routines in place. And I know, if I drop my kids off at 7:30 at daycare, I know I have at least a half an hour, maybe an hour before my day starts. And you can choose to do a lot of different things with that time. You could clean the house, you can fold laundry, but I want time to myself. Like I can fold the laundry and clean the house when my kids are there. I can't exercise or do deep breathing when my kids are crawling all over me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just being more mindful of those things. And then, maybe my diet isn't as clean as it once was, but I'm also trying to seek balance with that too. And I try to make eating healthy as easy as I can. So if I am prepping meals for clients, maybe I make a little bit more for my family.
Sure.
So things like that.
Well, and I really liked what we were talking about before we get on the podcast, but, Rashawn and I were talking about like our definition. We'll get into this in just a second, but I really like what you said about your thinking about your day and what's needed for you in that day. So if you're super exhausted, you've been up in 5,
right?
You're saying, well, I'm going to go out for a hard run about 2:00 in the afternoon. And you're like, no.
I think you tell yourself sometimes this, and then you never do it because you put too much pressure on yourself. But if you go into it saying, you know what, I'm probably not going to have that much energy, but I know I'm going to do something, but I'm not going to put pressure on, like even the Peloton. I'm not going to.
But it doesn't have to be like a redlining
right.
workout. I'm going to move my body because I need that energy. I need that. But that's really what I need right now. I need more yin yoga. I need more. I'm definitely changed my tune about that in the last probably 10 years.
Yeah.
Before it was like get in the gym.
Work out
sweat, super hard. Yeah. Get crushing the cardio. Do the strength training. Do all that. Now it's more restorative stretching, strength training, playing.
Right.
But it's really listening what's needed and really what I think you're really good at is you're all about the flow. It's not about eating perfect.
Nope.
It's about just do the best you can.
Right.
And some days are going to be better than others, but I'm not really going to go too far off the wagon, but at the same time. So with that being said, keep going on the self-care. You started talking about food. You don't have to be perfect with that.
Yeah, and I think when you have more balance, it makes life more fun. We're going to Bahamas this weekend, and, we want to get our beach bodies in order. And there's going to be a lot of people that we're going with a big group, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who are, like, in very good shape. A lot of people don't have kids, and that doesn't mean you have to be out of shape, but there's just priorities are different. And so we just started, like, maybe not drinking as much wine and like not buying so many snacks and just little things like that. And it's all fine and we feel good. But I think when you start to worry too much or you start to restrict yourself, it takes the fun out of it a little bit. And then you get so concentrated on what you can't have. And I think when you just live a lifestyle where you just don't want to indulge too much or you're like aware of it, then you don't have to worry so much about starting a strict program, stopping.
Yeah, I'm not counting calories, and I'm eating skinless chicken. I'm not.
And that's why, and the private chef world has really opened my eyes because I think sometimes some of my clients see me as a dietitian, and they're like, "Well, I want healthy, but I don't want too healthy." I get that a lot, and I'm thinking, I'm not even sure what that means because yes, my approach is more seasonal and fresh.
So. I want healthy, but I don't want too healthy?
Too healthy, yeah.
Well, explain it to me.
I know. And so they said, I still like burgers, and I like bread, and I like this and that. And I was like, okay, I guess I shouldn't even use the word health. Sometimes I don't even say the word health or healthy because I'm talking about food. Yeah,
the belief system right there. That's interesting because I've heard you talk about too healthy, but I have no idea what that means.
So honestly... And speaking to our friend Anna Mason, like I just had a little bit more clarity where not that I want to like leave my dietitian credentials behind, but sometimes I don't lead with that because at the end of the day, I'm cooking food.
Yeah.
And I think it's all healthy because it's real food. I'm using butter. I'm using beef, but it's the best quality I can find. And then nothing's off limits. Yeah. So my healthy may not mean someone else is healthy. I'm not like depriving myself of anything. I'm still using cheese and, fats and whatever, but
well, is that, we're at the Easter brunch and everybody's looking at my plate and I'm like, we're at Easter brunch. I mean, and there's so much to choose from. Right. I mean, you're going to lose your mind, but at the same time, it's just, the 80-20 rule. But I think what you're saying is that sometimes people have that belief that I'm going to be so extreme. I got to count on my calories. Here comes the skinless chicken. blah,
Right.
blah, blah, protein drinks or whatever it is. And reality is they're losing the whole
Well,
concept of
and I think
eating.
the biggest thing, the biggest issue I have with dieting is it doesn't allow you to have a social life. And like you're there at Easter with all of your friends and your family, and you're seeing people and my kids are there, and one buffet is not going to ruin your health goals.
Well, and the other thing too, you can be smart about the buffet too.
Right. Yep.
So I didn't get everything that, I mean, you're not going to lose your mind, but
No.
I think what you're saying too is you can really have your cake and eat it too. You just choose to not overdo it, or, and again, if you want to let your hair down and do whatever you want. So I think you do a good job of that. Like you have a glass of wine, you have a burger, you have whatever, but it's just not what you do all the time.
Well, and you also want to keep in mind, you want to be a role model. I mean, my kids are in a stage where they want chicken nuggets and hot dogs and whatever, but they also want their wheatgrass and spirulina, and they want these things that they see me doing. And I think I've just noticed, as a parent now, when I see other parents dieting, it does something to the kids and the way they think about food. And like, I don't want to say that this food is bad or good. I don't want my kids to think that I came in to teach a lesson to my 4-year-old's class at school, and we talked about superfoods. And I said, superfoods are just foods that superheroes eat. And they're like, yeah. And I said, what foods are superfoods? Chicken, strawberries. Like they know what's, you don't have to say healthy. You don't have to say good or bad. They know that Batman is not eating candy all day. Mm-hmm. You don't have to say that to them. They know. So it's just like common sense.
Say Brady. Every time I see a Brady, I'm like, and then Brooks is doing the same thing. But, whether it's Matt's kids or your kids, but, the cod liver oil is muscle juice.
Right.
It's not healthy for them. It's muscle juice.
Yes.
So however you want to sell the plan.
And you sell that to your spouse, I think, you can't be too extreme over anything, and you have to make it fun and not.
But I think what you said at the very beginning, now we're getting more mindful of our decisions on self-care.
Well, and that's what mindfulness is, to have energy in the present moment, you have to practice mindful resting and mindful moving and mindful eating. And it's just paying attention a little bit more on purpose, but also when you rest, you just rest. If you're sleeping, you're just sleeping. The TV's not in the background. Like, maybe you could have a sound machine or white noise, but you don't have any fancy bracelet on. You're just sleeping. Don't worry about all the other things. And then when you're eating, you're just eating. Don't try to multitask and do, all the work that you have to catch up on. Just eat. Or like moving. Maybe you do, if you feel like you do the same movement every day and it doesn't allow you to be present, do something different, like yoga.
We were talking, Molly and I were talking about this earlier today, and we were talking about at our gym, and I said, it's interesting, I give my clients a choice. Would you like some background music or, whatever, or would you like silence? And most of them have some kind of noise in their workout, and they've really liked the stillness and the silence. Yeah. And so I want them to listen to their breath. I want them to, hear instructions or motivation or whatever we're talking about. But I think sometimes we get so caught up in that I need all this stuff. And the reality is I need to get more mindful of, like I was talking to a client the other day and I'm saying, let me ask you a question. So how do your biceps feel when you're doing that posture exercise? I want you to think about, what does your bicep feel like? He said, I never thought of that before. I just do the movement. I said, so now we're being more mindful of the movement. So I want to kind of not switch gears here, but I want to get into a little bit about yoga, because Rashawn and I were talking about this earlier, like, because you're a yoga instructor, you're certified, you do whatever, but let's go back in time. What got you interested in yoga?
So I grew up just in a gym, like you, because of you.
Sorry.
And so I was all, and it's a good thing. But, we always, we went to Northern Michigan. We hiked the sand dunes for fun, and we went out west skiing. Like everything we did involved exercise, which was great. And I loved to move my body. But as I got older, I realized that there was this whole other world of movement, and it was slower, and it was like there was more awareness involved, and it just tapped into maybe what I needed at the time.
Sure.
So when I moved to Chicago, I was surrounded by lots of busy things. It was just busy. And I found beach yoga because I wanted to take advantage of being outside and just kind of slow down a little bit and do different forms of exercise. And so, but I didn't want to go into like a dark yoga studio. I wanted to be outside. Well, now one of my good friends and who I'm holding a yoga retreat with, she was my first yoga instructor at the beach. So there was this whole beach yoga program, and she really got me into it, and I loved it, and I loved the movements. And then eventually I started taking her classes at the yoga studio that she taught at, and I realized that there was yin yoga, which was more restorative. There was power yoga, and there was all these different kinds of yoga. And at the time, I really liked power yoga. I liked to do headstands and crow pose and all these crazy poses. But then there was times where I wanted like more slower things. And so one of my apartments in Chicago was right across the street from this yoga studio where she taught at. And I started working the front desk like a couple hours a week so that I got free yoga. And so I could do as much yoga as I wanted. I could go to I didn't have any kids either. So I could go to like an 8 a.m. yoga. I could go to an 8 p.m. yoga.
Different pace in your life.
So then the yoga studio started doing these yoga teacher trainings, and they said, you should really do a teacher training. We're doing a 2-week intensive. And I was working for OTL at the time, full-time, and doing a lot of speaking events. And they were doing this 2-week teacher intensive training during these 2 weeks where I had no traveling or nothing happening. So I jumped right in. It was 200 hours of yoga in like a kind of like a 2-week span. We made up some of those hours later on. But anyway, there was such a yoga community. And I think a lot of the times people do yoga, it's not for the movements necessarily, it's for the community. Even with prenatal yoga, a lot of pregnant women, they don't necessarily do yoga for, obviously it helps with birth and makes your pregnancy easier and feel better, but they do it for that sense of community. So that's how I got into it. And then these yoga people kind of became my family, and I did this 2-week intensive training course that never happens. You can't find many programs like that. And it was just opened my eyes to yoga. We learned a lot of different things about, the rules of yoga, like do no harm on your body. Don't overstretch, do movements that serve you, that don't hurt you. So there was just a lot of mindfulness practices within that yoga training that was just eye-opening to me, I think.
When I like what you just said too, that do things or movements that serve you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when I first started taking yoga, I was never ever explained that. You just got to follow the instructor.
Yeah,
and I'm like, I can't do that. But that didn't serve me.
No. And then you probably didn't like it.
No,
there's
it's
a lot
too
of
hard.
people that say, oh, I hate yoga. I don't like getting upside down. A lot of people say that. You
Right.
don't have, I love, and a lot of yoga teachers, when you first start class, they say, if you can breathe, you can practice yoga. If you do nothing else today but breathe, that is yoga. You can be in child's pose the whole time. You don't have to do any crazy poses.
It's interesting. Like I'll do yoga and I'll move, there's things that are certain hard. I like it. I've done beach yoga with you
Right.
before, but I remember last time we did yoga with you and you say, hey, let's just go in child's pose for a little while. And it's very relaxing.
Yeah.
Versus I can't wait to get child's pose, but it's at the end of the,
Right.
it's at the very end.
Yes.
You know?
You need movement to still the mind. And that's why when people say, oh, I love Shavasana, I could do Shavasana the whole class. No, you actually couldn't because your mind would be too busy. But when you're doing the movements, it calms the mind and it
So
prepares
explain that
you.
for a second.
So when you're doing a lot of these poses, you're connecting your breath with movement, but you're working the body in a way that allows you to still the mind. When you do balance poses, your mind is clear.
But if you're doing a Shavasana.
If you're doing Shavasana, if you're in meditate, so say you don't like meditation, you have a hard time sitting still and you can't focus on your breath, do movement first. Maybe you try a yoga class or do some jumping jacks.
So that's kind of what we try to teach. You want to get the movement going.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And then you start.
You move the body, you still the mind.
Move the body, still the mind. So that's what we always talk about. Move the body, still the mind.
Yep.
So if we're trying to calm the mind down, get the mind still, we need to move the body.
Right.
But then we need to also tone it down a little bit.
Yes.
I think a lot of people don't, and I look at that's what's needed. I don't think a lot of people realize that's really what's needed. I remember when Dr. Phil, we talk a lot about Dr. Phil, but one of the trainings we did way back in the day, he was doing sleep training at night.
Yeah.
And he couldn't get these guys to relax, mostly
Right.
men,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that most of them needed less intense training.
Yes.
They needed more,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
The pace.
They
The
needed,
pace that you're talking
they
about.
needed to change the pace, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and there's times where I do want to be in Shavasana the whole hour. And that is a practice. It's called Yoga Nidra, where you're just in that pose the whole time and you do nothing but connect with your breath. But I think most people, it's more rewarding if you're moving and you're working hard. That's where you can really get into that stillness. And then the silence piece. Like in our yoga training, we learned a lot about, in order to bring, you know, the person that you're teaching yoga to true bliss, you need that silence. And I think sometimes yoga instructors, they blare the music or they do the sound baths, and those are all good. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of people just need that silence.
And as I mentioned earlier, when we're doing private training here, at the end, get up on the table, we do a lot of manual stretching. So it's even
That's great.
very relaxing.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, it's this complete stillness and breath work. And they walk out, wow,
You feel amazing.
I'm a new person. Yeah.
Right. Like we did yoga for our employees here a couple weeks ago. And I mean, I could tell everyone's always in a good mood anyway, but everyone was just in a better mood.
Sure.
And it felt so good. And it just, that's what, at the end of the day, you always want to come back to what things are actually going to make you feel good. And what foods actually make you feel good. What movements make you feel good. What kind of resting strategies make you feel good. Because, living in Chicago, I met a lot of fitness professionals who, had six-pack abs and had tons of followers on social media, but they weren't happy people. They struggled with a lot of mental health issues and depression because they didn't have that balance and they were deficient in a lot of nutrients. They looked really good and people wanted to be them, but at the end of the day, they were lacking in things. And I think that's where balance comes in. I mean, you want to look good and you want to feel good, but I think those go together.
And that polarity
times.
management, we talk a lot about that as the yin and the yang it's never about being in balance, but it's recognizing that I'm really sideways here for a second.
Yep.
So what are a few of the other things about yoga if you're explaining to somebody, again, I think you've explained already a few, but you brought a few other things up earlier about, like for you personally, what's more related to you? I think that would help the audience recognize this a little bit more. You were talking about you're well-grounded and you're this. And so walk us through a little bit of that.
There's different energies that
I really like that.
That, and you've probably heard it a little bit before, like Vata and Pitta and Kapha, different energies. Like some people are just very high strung, they're fire. They probably need slow pace stuff,
and it's just recognizing that, correct?
Yeah. And but you also, when you do those slower paced things, that it almost like feeds your soul. You need that. I think sometimes they seek other things. Like these high intense people naturally want high intense exercises and they almost need the opposite. So there was just things I learned in yoga where I have characteristics of Kapha, which is more of like my energy. And basically I'm slow to anger. I can be laid back, but I also need stimulation, and I need stimulation from social things, maybe high-intensity exercises. There's things that I also need just to fuel me too and help me to find balance, like I need space to myself, and that could be because I'm a twin too, and I've had to share a lot of things. I need clean, so I don't like clutter.
For sure. You need space. And you need clean.
Yeah, and I know I do, and a lot of that is from just working at home for a lot of years. That was my workspace, and I needed a clutter-free space to kind of get into the flow. Some people can have laundry all around them and dirty dishes. I just can't, and I know it, and I own it, and it's all fine. But there's just things, and like I know part of being this kind of energy practice is I don't like cold and wet things. Like I love sun. I love sunshine. I like warm weather. Like I need more of those things.
Well, and I think too, you said, again, back to the energy, clutter can really cause people to really,
oh yeah,
just drag them down. Too much. again, we all know that we declutter something. You're like,
you feel
wow,
great.
closet
Yeah.
feels good, or my car feels
Or
better.
go somewhere. Like for you, you can work at home.
Yeah.
You have an office there.
Mm-hmm.
But you probably are way more productive when you come into the office.
It depends. I'm more productive with people, but I'm
Right.
more, I need that if I'm going to write or do
Yep.
whatever, I want that silence and that space. So
Yeah, but I think, and too, when in my yoga training, I knew it, but I never could necessarily articulate it. I did realize that silence is really what I need at the end of the day. I need time for just silence.
So a couple of nuggets I think we want to kind of, as we wrap this up, I think silence is really, Dr. Phil, again, I use him a lot, but I remember him, he had a 10-day silent retreat. And I asked him one day, and I think I mentioned this before in a podcast, but he said, I don't think you're ready for that.
Yeah.
So he said, why don't you start out with a 24-hour silent day? And it was easy for me when I was traveling. But I think a lot of us just leaving, if you're listening to this podcast today, just say, hey, I need to give myself some silence throughout the day and be intentional about it.
Yeah, and just mindful and intentional. I mean, if you're driving in the car, silence. Like Matt is really good about listening to podcasts. That could be what drives him. He needs, some noise maybe. Who knows? People like podcasts. I love just silence in the car.
But I think everybody, whether you like podcasts or music or whatever,
Yeah.
but we all need silence.
We do.
More people, if you look at the kids and, sometimes we overstimulate and there are all sorts of stuff. So, and I think yoga you mentioned earlier, it really gets back to what's right for you.
Yeah, and that's what we learned in yoga is there's no one right way to move. You do things that feel good. I always tell people, you may get into a pose that makes you feel uncomfortable. Just breathe into that discomfort. It shouldn't hurt you. You shouldn't have to, wrap your leg around your head or do a you don't have to do any of that stuff if that doesn't feel good to you. There's still poses. I've been practicing yoga for a long time now. There's still poses I don't like and I don't feel good to me, like bow pose.
But I think what you just said too, if you can breathe into the pose, if you can't control your breath, then we know the pose is too hard.
Right. Yep,
and
exactly.
So I remember you talking a lot about that, like breathe into the pose, or Tony Thomas or Shiloh or whoever, I'm taking yoga with, they'll always say breathe into the pose. And if you can't maintain, it's like your form, you start falling apart because you can't control your breath.
Yep.
And if your breath can't be controlled, then we know the intensity or the stress is too high on the body.
Well, and there's different forms of yoga too. So if you want more power flow, you can do that. If you feel like you can't connect with your breath in yoga practice, maybe you do more of a yin yoga. So there's
I really liked yin yoga.
Yeah, we did
that
that a lot when I was pregnant, and it was
like that a
basically
lot.
just, on your butt and you do stretching and that's the thing. It was fun because I learned a lot about different practices. I also learned about kids yoga, which is just so fun. And my kids' daycare, every Wednesday, they have a yoga instructor who comes in, and they send videos and pictures. These kids are not doing yoga. Who knows what they're doing? But they're moving. They're doing cow pose. They're mooing. They're having fun.
They're doing
and
cat pose.
Yeah, it's just, you have your tree and you grow your branches and you just.
That's great.
Yeah, it's just fun stuff. So
yeah, make it fun and entertaining, and they're moving, working on their balance and mobility and all that kind of stuff with it. So, all right. So as we wind down, is there anything else you want to make sure you cover before we sign off today?
No, I just would say, think about, how you're showing up in the present moment. Do you have energy? How are you showing up to the people around you? Is how you're living your life affecting those around you? Do you not have energy? Are you mindful of your relationships? Look at the big picture of your life and just think about how you can show up better in the moment. And I think it does all come down to practicing that self-care.
And being intentional about that self-care.
Yep, yeah, exactly.
Well, as always, it was a treat hanging out with my daughter today. Let's do this again real soon. And for those of you out there, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us anytime. We have an amazing team here. Rashawn's trying to get us to look better than we are, I guess, and sound better than we are. But anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at ontargetliving.com, and we'll see you next time.